All right, British, thank you for coming on the show. What are your thoughts on Michael Saylor's recent comments referring to self-custody advocates as quote unquote paranoid crypto anarchists?
That's a great first question. I think that even though a lot of Bitcoiners, self-custody advocates, et cetera, are going to hate what Michael Saylor has said, I kind of tend to agree with him. I tend to agree. And remember, I don't think at least the way I heard it, I don't think he said that self-custody is terrible. I think what he said is that the fears around the institutional involvement are overblown. And I think particularly he was rebutting a question to do with a 6102 executive order in the gold era where, that people were quote unquote ordered to hand over their gold, which they didn't do, right? They voluntarily handed over gold that they wanted. And I think only about 12% of the gold was handed over at that time under a 6102. 6102 fears are what gold bugs, and I know because I was in the gold space, gold bugs used to scare the shit out of people to buy more gold at an inflated premium, right? It's one of the tools that you use. It's the same as, and that's the point that he was making in the interview, right? Like Bitcoiners are now using the fear of ETFs taking your Bitcoin as a way to keep these venture funded Bitcoin exchanges alive, right? And I completely understand the marketing behind it, but you got to at some point evaluate the truth of it too.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable interpretation because Bitcoiners are getting mad at him, but he was just debunking a Bitcoin FUD, right? Maybe a 6102 could happen, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the Bitcoin price. I mean, the gold price after 6102 continued to rip. And I think he's also not wrong when he calls us paranoid crypto anarchists. Like, I would wear that on my chest, right?
Be a compliment. Be a compliment.
Yeah, it really is. I don't trust the banks, and I will hold my own keys. But I understand, and I think this is kind of Saylor's point. That's not the right solution for everybody. And it's definitely not the right solution for all of the institutions that are about to put millions, hundreds of millions, and billions of dollars into Bitcoin.
Start mining Bitcoin today at marketplace.blockwaresolutions.com.
Yeah, I mean, look, I gotta tell you a perfect example with my parents, right? So they own a combination of the ETFs as well as spot Bitcoin, and they're looking at, at the stage that they're in life, they're looking at, okay, what do we want to do to enjoy retirement and this, that, and the other. And they were looking at, if there's no lending solutions, then maybe liquidating some Bitcoin in the peak of the next cycle because it will be their first complete cycle. And I said, well, you got two options. You can either sell some of that GBTC because they're in the UK, they still hold the GBTC, or you can sell. And before I even finished speaking, they said, no, we're going to sell the spot Bitcoin because the GBTC feels safer. It's just what feels safer to them at their age with their technical expertise and everything else, right? Me, I prefer a more balanced approach. So I have a much higher portion in self-custody. But I still have a significant amount in ETFs too, because I see that market evolving. So I don't think Saylor is completely wrong. I don't think he actually intended to say what people are giving him flack about, which is normal because it's Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter loves to do that. And I mean, it's really all about your time horizon, right? Like, I'm 24. I plan to hold Bitcoin for 4 decades. The likelihood of a 6102 is much higher for me than for your retired parents.
Exactly. So, you got to evaluate your own risks. You got to evaluate, where the world is going. Based on the data, I think, you being 24 years old, I actually think you're in a really good position to not ever see a 6102 as well. I obviously the probability increases with how young you are, but I think America is at a really good place right now in terms of the arc of America, the story arc of America. Certainly in a better place than the United Kingdom, and I think that America has a much higher chance of not a reversal but a more prosperous future than the UK at this point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that for a variety of reasons. You've been at the forefront of this discussion on MicroStrategy. Can you explain your thoughts on their Bitcoin strategy here? And as an investor, how does your approach change based on your time horizon?
MicroStrategy is an interesting vehicle. A lot of people compare it to a Bitcoin ETF, which it's not. An ETF, let alone a Bitcoin ETF. An ETF is a is a direct to vein source of converting capital to gaining exposure on the underlying asset on the ETF. You put in money, they buy the underlying asset immediately, right? Or T+1 or 2. MicroStrategy is quite intriguing, right? MicroStrategy is a leveraged vehicle because there will always be a premium due to the inefficiency of converting capital that goes into MicroStrategy into the underlying Bitcoin. So yes, the strategy for them is to accrete more Bitcoin to the underlying share. However, compared to an ETF, it's inefficient because they have to do financial engineering in order to accrete that Bitcoin to the underlying share. Whereas an ETF, the capital gets injected and tomorrow it's Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. So MicroStrategy has three ways basically to accrete more Bitcoin to the underlying share. Number one is to dilute the shareholder by doing ATM offers and selling stock into the market to raise cash and convert that into Bitcoin. Number two, they can lend out. They can issue bonds, right? They can issue convertible notes at a premium, which is also a great way of doing it because they're basically, it's like selling a call option at 40% higher than the market value, and they're extracting premium out of the market. The thing of contention that I have with a lot of new MSTR bulls. By the way, I bought MSTR on the very first day that they announced that they were moving their treasury to Bitcoin. So I've been in MSTR. My parents have been in MSTR since the very beginning. The question that I have is, how do you know as an investor, depending on your strategy, when to enter the trade or not, right? And so price is one thing, premium is another thing. And there's a lot of people in the MSTR discussion, especially some of the new MSTR bulls that have, in my opinion, maybe overextended their position into MSTR, are focused more on price than they are on premium. But then the thought is this: if you're holding for a 10-year window, does the premium really matter? But for an investor like me, I'm looking at it going, well, if I can buy Bitcoin at $64,000 in the market, why would I want to give MSTR $190,000 for that same Bitcoin? When what I can do is just buy IBIT now, wait it out until the premium to NAV comes down a little bit, and then just convert that original holding at a 1.6 or 1.8 into MSTR, and then take advantage of the premium expansion, right? So there's a lot of discussion around that. But ultimately, all we're all arguing is how fast and hard we're going up and to the right. Because MSTR is a very, very unique opportunity to gain exposure to Bitcoin. I've been saying it for a long time, that MSTR will be a one and done. There will not be any other company that can compete with what MSTR is doing. And now that's sort of coming to fruition. Even Michael Saylor himself is stumped that other companies are not doing it, but other companies can't do it. He is a unicorn in this space, and he will be lauded as a unicorn, as he deserves to be, because he's one of the smartest people that I've ever met in my life. And he's executed a strategy here to basically refine, right? You got to look at it like an oil refinery. MSTR is an oil refinery for turning crude, inefficient capital into a leveraged platform for speculating on this asset that we call Bitcoin, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really what MSTR is. So there's a lot of value to be gained from that. There is the fact that they can borrow capital at less sub 1% rates. You've got the fact that you can hedge against MSTR in a leveraged fashion. So if you're a long on IBIT, but you want to hedge because we're going into a bear market at a 1.5 to IBIT, you can just buy puts on MSTR, right? So there's a huge advantage here where MSTR is turning into this platform of speculation for people that want Bitcoin exposure. And we'll see how it continues to compete with, IBIT options and everything else that's coming out. But MSTR is a fantastic play. I think everyone, if you have a balanced portfolio of Bitcoin, I think MSTR should definitely be a discussion to be in that portfolio.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of great points there. And I would definitely agree. I mean, if your time horizon is 4 years, 10 years, or longer, it's worth a spot in a balanced Bitcoin portfolio. But like you said, kind of timing your entry based on this premium to NAV, I think is not a bad idea. And
it depends on your strategy, right? Because if you're just holding for 10, 15 years and you don't care, then eventually whatever premium extra that you paid will get squeezed out, right? At some point, Bitcoin is going to be worth $190,000 a coin. My issue coming from the gold space is, when gold bugs were trying to sell innocent people 1 gram bars of gold, and not realizing that there was a 47% premium attached to that. Those people that were buying those gold bricks, those little tiny gold 1 gram bars, are probably just about breaking even today, right? They were buying that in 2011. So I always had a problem with that, which is why when I started getting involved in gold, my perspective was buy GLD instead, because then there's no premium. So I always have an issue with that. I always have an issue with premium, because what premium does is it steals time from you. It steals time to profit. So if I've got, a $64,000 to $190,000 spread, that position in my mind is not turning a profit until that premium is squeezed out. I'm giving you advanced money, whereas I might as well just buy it myself and then wait until the premium is squeezed and then convert it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I think what's obviously really fascinating and advantageous to them is the volatility allows them to issue these convertible notes with such low interest rate, right? And I think just visualizing this expansion of the premium and then contraction, that is increased volatility, which is going to make their convertible notes even more attractive to that side, right? I don't think we'll ever run out of demand for their notes, because if you're an institutional investor, you get that security of, all right, they're going to pay back the principal at least. Plus, on top of that, I get exposure to MicroStrategy / Bitcoin in a long fashion.
Sure. The question is, and the first person besides myself that I ever heard speak about this in a clear, concise, level-headed way was Ben Workman in his latest interview with Tom, and basically he said, you got to look at the cash flow, because you can borrow money. Sure, everyone's saying, oh, MSTR can just borrow money, but you have to be able to service the debt, which is why the FASB rule changes are good, because hopefully by next year, MSTR will be able to take its Bitcoin and actually put it on the cash flow sheet. And if they can do that, now you can start servicing a larger amount of debt, and it allows you to extend your borrowing. But up until then, their borrowing is capped out at whatever the serviceable amount on the debt is. And I think that's probably around $100 million a year.
Yeah, that's a great point. Do you think that accounting rule change will spark some more companies to follow MicroStrategy's play?
Possibly, because it starts adding to their cash flow balance sheet. But again, MicroStrategy has done one unique thing which no other company has ever done, which is they admitted that the business was finished. Right? If you look at I still remember the first announcement that he made about Bitcoin, and he basically gave his shareholders due diligence time to go and find out whether they wanted to take the ride or not, or they would buy them out, basically. MicroStrategy has gone through a transition where the shareholders are in complete alignment to the objectives of Michael Saylor and the board, which is very unique. I don't know how you get that with Apple, for example, right? I don't know if there's shareholders that would sit there and go, wait a second, I'm paying you to innovate. I'm not paying you to hold Bitcoin, because I can do that myself.
Yeah, that's spot on. I remember, well, it gets confusing because they had a stock split, but he offered to buy them out at like a 20% premium, which if you convert to like the today's pricing would have been like $20 a share or something insane. And so those who got out, they definitely missed out on the ride. Do you think, because you put out a great tweet recently, I want to get your thoughts on this, is MicroStrategy's inclusion into the NASDAQ 100 or S&P 500, would that kind of change this dynamic where, like right now, like you said, all of their shareholders are all in on Bitcoin on MicroStrategy? Would that kind of alter if they were included in one of these larger index funds?
I don't think so, because those index funds they're not company specific, right? All they're saying is, I want to be in this index. And so when you're in an index, you're going to get capital put into your company no matter what. Plus, it's been 4 years that they've been selling this story. So if they're included in the index, no one is under the illusion now that MicroStrategy is not basically a Bitcoin accretion tool. Everyone knows that's what it is. Everyone understands it. Michael Saylor is a genius at educating the market slowly on what they're going to do, because the worst thing you can do in financial markets is try and scare someone, right?
Mhm.
You want them to know this is what we've been doing. This is how the results have worked out. Now we did a little bit more, and that's how the results worked out. We've now paid off the notes that we borrow. We now have sold some stock, and this is what happened to the share price. And now it's moving slowly, and now we're going to get S&P inclusion or Nasdaq inclusion. By the way, the Nasdaq inclusion date or the decision, I think, is end of November, which would be quite
Mhm.
exciting to see if that happens or not.
Yeah. Do you think there's a high likelihood or not? And then how would that inclusion really affect the stock? And how inversely, or I guess on top of that, how would that affect Bitcoin?
Here's what's interesting about that. I think they're missing a couple different benchmarks on what they need to hit in order to get there, in order to be included solidly. So I think it probably stretches until Q1 of next year, maybe Q2, until they're included in some kind of index. What's interesting about it is, as a result of the passive flows that are coming in through the index, and therefore the forcing of MicroStrategy to turn those flows into Bitcoin, do we now have a dampened bear market as a result of their continued purchasing because of the massive flows that are coming in through the indexes? That I don't know. We're going to have to find out. We're going to have to wait and see and find out on that.
Yeah. I've wondered the same thing about the ETFs. Like if Bitcoin exposure through the ETFs, even if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of someone's portfolio, if that becomes the norm, I don't think we get 75% drawdowns in the Bitcoin price going forward.
Yeah, but the ETFs are slightly different to MSTR being in an index, right? Because an ETF is not part of an index. An
Yeah.
ETF is like, I'm choosing to invest in Bitcoin. And if I think there's going to be a bear market, I can just choose not to invest in that ETF to get Bitcoin
Right.
exposure. With MSTR being in an index, you got all of these people earning their wages, and a portion of that is going straight into the index, regardless of what's going on with Bitcoin, regardless of what the sentiment is.
Hmm.
And if you're part of the Nasdaq or the S&P, you're just getting $500 million to put into Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
That's a very different approach to the ETFs. The ETFs could cause a bear market as normal. The thing that changes it is the type of buyer, and that's why I've been trying
Yeah.
to say, like, there's a rotation of the type of Bitcoin owner that's coming into the game, and that could dampen up the downside volatility. But the ETFs themselves, no, they don't really sit there and dampen out volatility to the
Right.
downside or the upside.
Right. Would this dampen to the upside with MicroStrategy's inclusion there, with like sort of rebalancing within these index funds? Like if MicroStrategy really starts to pump and they're like, all right, let's limit our exposure within the fund.
Possibly, but all of this really depends on how much flow and how significant that flow is from MicroStrategy into the underlying Bitcoin. Just to put that into perspective, these American ETFs are probably responsible for like sub 5 to 10% of the volume on Bitcoin. So, yes, they're buying. Yes, the buying is huge, but there's other avenues for volume and demand and supply besides the ETFs and MicroStrategy.
Right. How bullish is the launch of options on the Bitcoin ETF? And like, would you even think this is as bullish as the launch of the ETFs themselves?
No. So I've been saying that the ETFs are the single most bullish, launch or consideration for Bitcoin for the next decade. And a lot of people are, addicted to their dopamine, so they're sitting around trying to look for the next best thing. The American ETFs are more important than El Salvador. The American ETFs are more important than Bhutan. They're more important than anything that has happened thus far, and probably will happen for the next 10 years. Now, options themselves are a ancillary to the ETFs, right? It's not a new thing. It's on top of the ETFs. So I always estimated that, once the ETFs come, the options are going to come, and that is all part of one sort of bucket for Bitcoin. So the options are huge because it allows people to speculate. It allows, wirehouses have to hedge. Funds can hedge now a position without selling the underlying asset. So anything that brings liquidity to Bitcoin, it's good for Bitcoin. So the options are great for Bitcoin. And the
Hmm.
fact that I hopefully, depending on when they get launched, if we get to a bull market top, let's say I've 400% my profits this cycle, right? I'm completely happy to take 20% out of that 400% profit and go and buy put options, right? Just in case. It's like buying house insurance. So most people buy house insurance every single year. They pay for it, and then they hope that their house doesn't burn down. But just in case the house does burn down, they've taken a small percentage of the house value and protected the house with it. And that's what a put option on IBIT is going to be able to do. So hopefully that comes out in time and is trading in time, and there's a long enough options chain on that. But these are very, very good things. It means that I will not be selling any of my Bitcoin in the cycle high, and I'll be able to buy options in order to protect the downside.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. And for me, it's like it's great as a financial product, but if you just look at it from like a Bitcoin news perspective, it's just another check mark of Bitcoin maturing as an asset class, as a network, as getting this mainstream adoption. Like you alluded to with El Salvador, it's like them adopting Bitcoin for the price. I mean, it's not really going to make that much of an impact, but it's just one more thing to point to and say, hey, Bitcoin is being embraced by the world. Everyone from nation states to individuals to Wall Street are adopting Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I genuinely believe that as soon as options start trading, you have a full stack of acceptance from Wall Street, basically, right? You can not only buy the underlying asset, you can now buy the ETFs. If you don't want the ETFs, you can take a leverage position on MSTR. If you don't want that, you can now use futures contracts. If you can't use the futures contracts, you have options. You have, and then, if you want to borrow against it, Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the, prized 24 firms with an access to the Federal Reserve, is now going to offer lending on Bitcoin too. So it is a full stack of acceptance on Wall Street, and it's full steam ahead.
Yeah, the Cantor Fitzgerald news, another one of those things. It's like, if you're in the Bitcoin world, you recognize how big this is, but people outside of the Bitcoin world, they're just not paying attention. One of the 24 primary dealers of treasury bonds with the Fed is like getting into Bitcoin and Bitcoin lending. So super
and they're doing it here's the crazy part. They're doing it at a $2 billion clip. Right? So it's not like we're getting in with $100 million to see what happens. They're offering $2 billion of lending. And as soon as that book is eaten up, they're going to go with another $2 billion of lending. Yeah. So, Howard Lutnick is, and I said this, right? Everyone was excited about the Trump speech at Bitcoin 24. And I said, that was the more important announcement. Trump was great, right? But the real important announcement was what Howard Lutnick said. And I urge everyone to go watch his presentation at Bitcoin 24.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember sitting there. It was the morning of the Trump announcement. I'm sitting there eating like breakfast in the conference hall, and nobody's even like really paying attention to this billionaire, multi-billionaire, one of the largest banking institutions in the world. Everybody's focused on, Trump. But I definitely agree that was overshadowed, but far more important. Speaking of Trump, how will the U.S. presidential election will this kick off the start of the bull market? This kind of moment of uncertainty being behind us.
So, obviously, if we're going to talk about politics, I have to let everyone know I'm not an American citizen. I don't get to vote in America. So I have my opinions, obviously, just like everybody else, but my opinions are really worthless because I'm not a voter. However, I will express my opinion and say that I think if you are a Bitcoiner at this time, I've certainly committed that on every election going forward in the United Kingdom, unless a party is a Bitcoin party, they're not getting my vote, because I think we're at a point now where the underlying issues have to be solved. And Bitcoin is the only solution that I can see to solve those solutions. It is ridiculous to me that people in the UK cannot buy an American Bitcoin ETF today. It is ridiculous to me that the government has not clarified regulations. It is ridiculous to me that that everyone is just sleeping on this asset that could revive the United Kingdom back into some form of glory, and everyone's just sitting around while the US is full steam ahead. The UAE is full steam ahead on these things. So I think that any person in the world, you should be voting for the pro-Bitcoin candidate. And in this scenario, it happens to be Trump, right? And by the way, I don't care which side of the party you come from. If you're pro-Bitcoin, but your plan is to change the weather, You're pro-Bitcoin, I'm voting for you. If you're pro-Bitcoin, but your plan is to lower taxes, you're pro-Bitcoin, I'm voting for you. Because that has to be the answer. The answer is, I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, you're pro-Bitcoin. That's the way you get the most benefit as Bitcoiners. You want everyone tap dancing to the tune of Bitcoin. So, and right now, Kamala Harris's side has not done a good job at demonstrating their pro-Bitcoin energy. So in that scenario, in my opinion, I don't care what your politics is, you should be voting for the pro-Bitcoin candidate at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I generally agree with that. But I will say Trump, I didn't mind when he was pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto. I was the same way when I first got into it. It's hard to understand the difference. But him actually launching his own token, World Liberty Financial, that's really dissuaded me. And honestly, I'm very hesitant to go to the ballots because of that single moment.
Yeah, I can understand that. He's, but look, at the end of the day, a year ago, President Trump was talking about how the U.S. dollar is the best currency, and Bitcoin is this thing that he doesn't understand. And now in a year, he's now suddenly pro Bitcoin. What do you think? He's been sitting there reading the Bitcoin Standard. That's not been happening, right? What's happened is the smart people that monitor the campaign have realized that there's a voting base there that will vote for you because you are a pro-Bitcoin candidate. And the powers that be, in my opinion, the real president of America is Larry Fink, and there's no election on that presidency.
Yeah.
And that president has decided that Bitcoin is happening. And he's literally said it on the latest BlackRock earnings call. I don't know whether you heard that. He basically said, it doesn't matter which president is elected. In essence, I'm paraphrasing, right? In essence, he said, doesn't matter which president is elected, this is happening, right? So I don't care now anymore because, from my perspective, President Larry Fink is in power, and the whole of the Republican Party. As much as everyone, you guys over there, you guys love going with your left and your right and this, that, and the other, I highly recommend everyone read a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's written in the 1970s, and it's about American politics. But, if everyone thinks that suddenly, these Republican senators, these morons that have been taking people to war for the last 30 years and printing as much money as possible and trading on the sidelines are now suddenly all pro-Bitcoin because, someone rolled up and gave them a copy of the Bitcoin Standard and they had a come to Jesus moment about Bitcoin. I think that's absolutely and utterly delusional. What happened was, what I can believe more likely happened was that a packet showed up on their office, which told them, if you ever want campaign donations, you are now pro-Bitcoin. And now overnight, everyone's pro-Bitcoin. That makes more sense to me than imagining that these people are intelligent enough to read the Bitcoin Standard and understand what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, a common thing I hear from no coiners is that, quote unquote, they are going to shut down Bitcoin, but they is BlackRock and they're pro Bitcoin. They want the price to pump. So it is kind of laughable. Like, the biggest financial institution in the world, the people really kind of pulling the strings behind everything, are now pro Bitcoin. Obviously, Bitcoin's going to win regardless of which puppet gets in the White House.
Right. I agree. Yeah, look, at the end of the day, if I was an American, if and I believe I should deserve to vote. I might come up the Mexican border and vote 5 times myself because of the amount of capital I have in American markets. But if I was American, I would certainly be voting for President Trump this time around.
Yeah, you used to be able to vote, it required you to be a property owner. If you have assets in U.S. stocks, you're a property owner, right? So that would make sense.
Same thing in the UK, right? Now it's all gone to shit, basically, because then, the vote doesn't mean anything. Anything you dilute, anything you remove proof of work from turns to shit eventually. And that's what's happened with the vote. That's what's happened with politics. It's what happened with every single thing in your country and in mine. And it's a disappointment. And hopefully we can turn it around, or at least one of our countries can turn it around, and then everyone else can move over there.
Yeah, well, speaking of the UK, what are your thoughts on the ECB's recent report criticizing Bitcoin for making the OG holders wealthy at the, as they say, at the expense of everyone else? It's an unfair, unequitable system. What are your thoughts on that report?
It is unfair. It is unequitable because the whole point of it is it's a monetary network. It's not a human-based network. It is not a fiat network. Equality is a fiat illusion. because in the jungle, there is no sense of equality. It is big bank takes little bank every time. And so the people who got in early and managed to secure their position in a monetary network that cannot be printed is the most finite network, that we've ever created in terms of wealth. They deserve to have the position that they risked it for. Like,
Yeah.
it's just normal, right? By the way, that paper is pretty bullish, because later in the paper, with the part that nobody's talking about, is the author of the paper talking about how Bitcoin could be worth 10 million euros at some point per Bitcoin, right? Everyone's completely missed that part. I think the paper's quite bullish. So yeah, no, the idea that everyone is equal is a complete and utter farce. And I guess I don't have a problem saying this, but a lot of Bitcoiners have a problem saying this. Like, that it's a monetary network. Why do you think I've been shouting for a year, get to 1 Bitcoin? And before me, it was American HODL shouting about get to 6.15 Bitcoin, right? Like, it is unequal. And how hard you work to secure your percentage of the overall monetary network is going to dictate your position. And if you are not serious enough, you are going to not have a significant position. And then you're going to be left to just begging for to join a group that has the same cares and concerns that you do. Everyone thinks Bitcoin's going to come around and like we're going to get suddenly more equal and fairer. No, we are right now in the world at peak protestability. This is going away. It was never like this, right? Now you can protest everything because they'll just print money and give it to you to buy your time in order to go protest. That ain't going to happen in a Bitcoin world. But if you don't have enough Bitcoin, you are going to be sitting there being a subject to what the people that have the most Bitcoin want. That's how it should be. That's how it always has been in human history.
Right. I think that was well said. The idea of equality in any sense of the word is very idealistic and just flat out wrong. I mean, some people, you're born to a wealthy family and you're 6'3" and have 120 IQ, and other people you're born, in a third world country to a single mother with 10 children, right? Like you have 75 IQ. It doesn't matter, nature, nurture. Like, some people are going to work hard and kind of create their own equality or luck, right? So equality doesn't exist anywhere in nature. And to think that any kind of monetary system or political system could change that, the only way we're all equal is if we all have nothing.
Right. And that's what they want to do, right? That's what they want. They want everyone to have nothing besides a small number of people. Yeah. And by the way, when you look around at the world and how easily the world is manipulated and how easily the world is moved in any direction that I want it to move in, I would kind of want the same thing if I was like the top 300 people in the world running everything. Like, look at these animals. Yeah. Let's just give them nothing and let them be happy.
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoiners like to talk about Bitcoin as if it's this silver bullet that's going to fix everything. It won't. There's still going to be corruption. There's still going to be theft. There's still going to be quote unquote inequality. But at least what it does is give everyone an accessible means to save their wealth. Some people will take advantage of that. Some people already have. They're already using Bitcoin to store their wealth. Other people won't be so bright, and they're going to consume more than they produce, and Bitcoin's going to be of no use to them.
Yeah, what Bitcoin basically allows is it adds accountability, because once you get rid of it, you can never get any more, right? That's what it adds. It's not, there's obviously going to be people who are going to figure out how to use their Bitcoin to give them influence, right? And that influence is going to generate them wealth. That's completely normal. It's part of nature. But they're also going to have the risk hanging over their heads, which is, if I don't get this right, I'm going to lose this Bitcoin forever. Right. And that's why it's the same thing as these morons that are now talking about, trading Bitcoin, because they think that they've found some kind of curve fit that's going to tell them when to sell Bitcoin and it's going to top out, because they want to, and I'll direct quote, multiply your Bitcoins. Like, it's completely retarded. And in my opinion, I think people should just hold on to their Bitcoin and protect it for their progeny. Otherwise, they're going to be left with a last name that has no Bitcoin.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Never sell your Bitcoin, only spend your Bitcoin is kind of how I view it. If you want to spend some sats to directly increase your quality of life now, but thinking the top has to happen at this point in the cycle and then try to buy back, that's a fool's game. you're going to lose your Bitcoin if you do that.
Completely agreed. You know, people think that because the way I talk, like like I want you to just hoard Bitcoin and nothing else. It's not true. If you want to buy a house because it's going to allow you to build the family that you wanna build, just like you said, spend that Bitcoin on that, but don't regret doing it because the Bitcoin would have been worth more. Like, understand what you're actually doing. The morons are the people that were sitting there going, all right, I'm going to sell, sit in cash, and then buy again later, because there's so many things that are changing in the market. You just don't know what's going to happen. Plus, if you're in the US and you're buying in the space of a year, what have you got, like 30% short-term capital gains taxes or something like that in the US? So you basically built short-term? I thought it was higher short-term.
Oh, no, yeah. Long-term is 15. I wouldn't know
Yeah.
because I haven't sold any Bitcoin yet.
There you go. So, you know, like in the UK, for example, the Labour government and the newly elected Labour government is going to propose to increase capital gains taxes to 39%. So let's assume that that's the law. You're basically building in a 40% bear market for yourself anyway. Now, let's say if BlackRock's in the game now, MSTR gets included in these, in these indexes, and the market only dips 50% instead of 75%. Right, this time around. So now you've just basically done all this timing, and if you manage to time the exact fucking bottom, you've managed to build yourself an advantage of 10% because you had to pay 40% in taxes. Yeah. So what's the point? Right? That's really the thought process that smart investors are going to go through, and I believe they will say, well, I just can't be bothered to sell this.
Yeah, it's really, the risk reward ratio is not in your favor there. You mentioned earlier, and this has kind of been your tune for a while now, is get to 1 Bitcoin. At what point does it make sense to lower this target goal? And is it too late for most people to get to 1?
Never. It's never going to make sense. Because I thought about this. It's like, well, let's say I want to keep talking. Do I keep saying, do I now say get to half a Bitcoin or whatever else? And I've come to the conclusion that no. It's not worth diluting the message just because people can't get there. People should be pissed off with themselves. People should be offended. People should be reacting. Every time I say get to 1 Bitcoin, not everybody can get to 1 Bitcoin. Yeah, motherfucker, you're right. Not everybody can get to 1 Bitcoin. But what are you doing about getting to 1 Bitcoin? We all know that people can't get to 1 Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean that I don't think my message should be diluted because of that. So it will always and forever be get to 1 Bitcoin, and either you're going to get there or you're going to forever chase it. But I'm not going to dilute my message to say get to 0.5 Bitcoin. I'll leave that for whoever's next, right? There's going to be someone else next. It might be yourself. It might be other people that are coming up in the game, and they're like, okay, well, get to 0.25 Bitcoin or whatever it is. And that's fine. That's just not you get to 1 Bitcoin or you die trying. And that will be my message until I stop talking about Bitcoin.
That was very well said. You got me hyped up. I think that's a great place to end it off. So where can we send the audience to keep up with what you're doing?
Just go to YouTube and type in BritishHODL, look for this face, and you should be able to find the channel. Or I'm on X too, at BritishHODL. Look for the verified account, because there's a lot of scammers on X as well trying to take people's Bitcoin. But yeah, that's how you get in touch with me. And obviously subscribe to Mitchell's channel and everything he's doing, and go follow him on X too. It's quite entertaining watching your tweets as well.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.